The train station buzzed with its usual chaos, announcements blaring, hurried footsteps echoing, and vendors shouting for attention. Amid it all, an elderly blind beggar named Amir sat quietly in his corner, gripping his cane, listening to the world he could no longer see. But today wasn't like any other day. Through the clamor of rushing crowds and the distant sound of a train whistle, Amir heard something that froze him in place, a desperate, heart-wrenching cry of a child. It wasn't just noise. It was fear, helplessness, and sorrow wrapped into one tiny voice. While hundreds passed by, ignoring the plea, Amir's instincts kicked in. Could a blind beggar, discarded by society, do what so many others refused to? What unfolded next was nothing short of a miracle, proving that heroes sometimes come from the most unexpected places. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Epic Story Moments. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Like, share, and comment to support more. Incredible stories like this. The train station was a vibrant, chaotic hub, always alive with movement and noise. It was as if time itself could barely keep up with the constant rush of passengers, the screech of train wheels on tracks, and the distant hum of city life outside. Vendors shouted over the cacophony, selling newspapers, snacks, and bottled water to the hurried travelers. The sound of train announcements echoed, bouncing off the station's cold stone walls, while people scurried in every direction, rushing to catch their trains, make phone calls, or simply get to their next destination. Amid all this, there was a silent presence. Amir, the old blind beggar who had become a fixture in this very spot. Amir's world was one of darkness, but not of despair. Though his sight had long been taken from him, his hearing had grown sharper, more acute, with the passing of time. It was as though his other senses had evolved to compensate for the loss of vision, giving him a heightened awareness of the world around him. While the bustling crowd moved with hurried steps, Amir sat still, relying on the sounds around him to paint a picture of the world he no longer saw. He could hear the difference between a child's light, hesitant footsteps and the determined, heavy steps of a businessman. The soft shuffle of a woman's shoes told him she was tired, perhaps carrying the weight of a long day, while the distant sound of a train approaching signaled the next wave of noise and people. Amir's position in the station was familiar to him. He had sat in the same corner for years, ever since he had been abandoned by his family. He had once been like any other man, full of dreams and aspirations, leading a life filled with potential. But a cruel twist of fate had changed everything. Blindness came to him suddenly, taking away not just his sight, but his ability to work, to care for himself, and soon after, his family. In their struggle to cope with their own problems, they found it easier to leave him behind. Abandoned and left to fend for himself, Amir had become invisible to most people. The few who noticed him would give him a coin or two, but they saw only his frailty, his misfortune, not the man he used to be or the man he could still be. Over the years, the station had become his home, a place where he could exist without being seen, without the burden of pity or sympathy. His cane, which once served as a tool for navigation, now became a symbol of his endurance, tapping rhythmically on the ground as he awaited the occasional charity of a passerby. But despite his outward circumstances, Amir had learned to embrace his situation. He had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the station, the daily ebb and flow of people, the cries of vendors, the shuffling of feet, and the whistle of the trains arriving and departing. Each day was like the last, and though he did not wish for much, there was a quiet satisfaction in the simplicity of his routine. He no longer hoped for a better life, nor did he expect miracles. All he wanted was to make it through another day. Yet, on this particular day, something felt different. There was a change in the air, a shift that Amir could not quite place but could sense all the same. The station seemed louder, more frantic. The usual rhythm of life here was disrupted, like a crack in an otherwise flawless melody. Amir felt it in the way the footsteps seemed to quicken, the voices carried an edge of urgency, and the noise from the vendors grew more persistent. The calls of tickets and water were louder than usual, almost frantic. His keen ears picked up bits of conversation. Fragments of words like child and lost, snippets of hurried dialogue between passengers that seemed far more anxious than normal. Despite his blindness, Amir had always been sensitive to the emotional undertones of the world around him. He could tell when something was amiss, even if he couldn't fully grasp the situation. He instinctively focused on these sounds, trying to make sense of the dissonance that had filled the air. But as quickly as the noise had built, it began to fade into the background as Amir returned to his usual state of quiet observation. He had no way of knowing that this particular day, this moment of heightened awareness, was the beginning of a life-altering change. A change that would turn his world upside down and lead him on a path that even his sharp senses could not have predicted. What Amir didn't know, as he sat in his corner, was that a child, lost, frightened, and separated from her mother, was nearby. Zara, no older than 5, had wandered away from her mother in the crowds and now found herself alone, the noise of the station deafening in her tiny ears. She cried out for her mother, but her voice was drowned out by the overwhelming sound of the crowd. Amir, however, could hear her clearly. The distinct wail of a child, lost and scared, was impossible to ignore. It pierced through the noise of the station, reaching Amir's sensitive ears in a way that nothing else could. He felt a tug in his heart, an immediate urgency to respond. Though his sight could not guide him, his hearing would lead the way. As the cries continued, Amir's determination grew. He knew that he had to act. In a world that often overlooked him, he had learned the importance of stillness, of waiting patiently for the right moment. And now, it seemed, that moment had arrived. Little did he know that his decision to help, to follow the sound of a frightened child's cries, would set into motion a chain of events that would forever change the course of his life. The station was as chaotic as ever, with the usual rush of passengers, the bustling vendors, and the clamor of trains arriving and departing. Yet, amidst the loud sounds of the station, there was one sound that broke through with a sharp clarity, a sound that pierced the noise like a cry for help. At first, it was faint, just a distant wail, barely audible over the hustle and bustle of the crowd. But to Amir's finely tuned ears, it was impossible to ignore. The cry wasn't just any sound. It was the unmistakable, frantic call of a child. The voice was small, lost, and terrified, the kind of cry that rang with desperation and confusion. Amir's heart tightened at the sound, his senses immediately zeroing in on it. While the world around him was a blur of motion and noise, this cry was clear, as if it had been meant just for him. His mind raced, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. The cries were scattered, fleeting. One moment they were close, the next they were far away. Amir knew that the child was disoriented, their tiny voice swallowed up by the noise of the station. But Amir also knew that he had to act. He had heard enough cries over the years, enough moments of distress, to understand that the child needed help. Amir's instincts kicked in, and he gripped his cane more tightly. Though his vision failed him, his other senses were more acute than ever. He could hear the distinct shuffle of feet around him, some fast, some slow, and the scent of a nearby food stall filled the air with its oily fragrance. But these were distractions. He focused only on the cries. With his head turned slightly to one side, Amir tried to follow the sound, his heart pounding as he prepared to act. For a moment, Amir hesitated. He was no fool. He knew the dangers of following a sound in the crowded chaos of the station. Many had walked past him without a second glance, and many more had ignored his presence altogether. He had learned to stay still, to avoid stepping into the fast-moving currents of life. But this time was different. Something about the child's cries stirred something deep within him. A familiar, almost primal urge to protect and help overwhelmed him. As he hesitated, Amir closed his eyes. He had grown used to navigating the world without sight, relying on his sharp hearing and sense of touch. The cane in his hand had become an extension of himself, a tool to help him feel his way through the world. He steadied himself, taking a deep breath, and decided, There would be no more hesitation. The cries were too urgent to ignore. Slowly, with careful precision, Amir began to move. His cane tapped rhythmically against the cold floor, sending out tiny vibrations that helped him sense the surrounding environment. He relied on the feel of the air around him, the slight shifts in temperature that indicated where the flow of people was thickest or thinnest. He could hear the faint rustle of someone's clothing nearby, the clink of a coin in a passing hand, and the steady hum of voices. But most importantly, he could still hear the child's cries. Amir moved cautiously but purposefully, following the direction of the sound. The cries were louder now, but still distant, as if the child was just beyond his reach. The fear in the voice was palpable, and each wail sent a surge of urgency through Amir. He didn't need to see to know that the child was in trouble. He could sense it in the cadence of the cries, the way they fluttered with panic. He took slow steps, mindful of the people around him. There were moments when the crowd grew thicker, and Amir had to pause to avoid colliding with hurried passengers. The station was alive with movement, and there was no shortage of distractions. But his determination to find the child only grew. The cries were his guide, his lifeline, and Amir followed them like a beacon. As he navigated through the crowd, Amir's thoughts raced. Who was this child? How had they become separated from their parents in such a chaotic environment? He could only imagine the fear the child must have been feeling, alone in the midst of so many strangers. The cries came in quick bursts, high-pitched and pleading, each one more desperate than the last. Despite his own struggles, despite the years of abandonment and isolation, Amir felt a deep connection to the child. He had spent so much of his life alone, forgotten by the world around him, that the thought of a child in the same situation struck a chord within him. The old man's heart, despite its wear and tear, still had room for compassion. He couldn't let this child remain lost, abandoned to the chaos of the station. The closer he got, the more his senses picked up. He could hear the faint shuffle of the child's feet, a telltale sign of someone small and lost in the crowd. The cries were louder now, and Amir's heart raced as he closed the distance. He had no idea what he would find when he reached the child, but one thing was certain. He couldn't turn back now. With every step, the noise of the station seemed to fade into the background. The sounds of rushing feet, the clattering of trains, and the muffled conversations of strangers blurred together. All that mattered now was the child, their cries, their pain, and the promise that Amir had made to himself to help. Finally, through the din, Amir reached the source of the cries. The small figure, the child, standing alone in the crowd, was clearly visible to him. Though he could not see her face, Amir could feel the sense of terror emanating from her small, trembling body. She was lost. She was alone. But Amir was here, and he would not let her be lost for much longer. Amir moved closer, his heart racing as he felt the urgency in the child's cries. He was getting close now. He could hear the soft shuffle of tiny feet, the hitch in the child's breath as she sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of her crying pierced through the chaos of the station, each sob ringing in Amir's ears like a cry for salvation. And then, through the haze of bustling footsteps and clattering voices, Amir found her. There, sitting on the cold concrete floor, was a little girl, no more than 5 years old. Her tiny body was curled into a ball, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees as she sobbed with a desperation that made Amir's heart ache. She was alone, surrounded by strangers, her tiny face hidden in her hands as tears soaked the fabric of her dress. Amir's breath caught in his chest. He had found her, the child who had been lost in the maze of the station, whose cries had led him through the crowd, was right in front of him. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her, and knelt down slowly, his cane tapping softly against the floor to announce his presence. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice soft and calming, though his own heart was pounding in his chest. "It's okay. You're not alone anymore." The girl's sobs continued for a moment, as if she didn't yet believe the stranger who had approached her. Amir waited patiently, allowing her to take in his words. His hand hovered slightly, unsure whether she would want his touch. But his voice carried the warmth and empathy that he had built over a lifetime of experiencing abandonment and loneliness himself. It wasn't until she realized that he wasn't going to hurt her that Zara looked up, her tear-streaked face showing the confusion and fear of a child who had been separated from her parents in a crowd she didn't understand. Her wide eyes locked with Amir's, and there was a moment of quiet understanding between them. She was scared, but Amir had seen fear before, and he wasn't about to let this child face it alone. "Are you lost, little one?" Amir asked, keeping his voice low and soothing. He didn't want to overwhelm her further, but the urgency was there. He needed to know where her parents were and what had happened. Zara's lip trembled as she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I was with my mommy and daddy, and then there were too many people. I couldn't find them anymore. I called out for them, but they didn't come." The pain in her voice hit Amir like a physical blow. He could feel her distress, the terror of being lost in a world full of faces she didn't recognize, surrounded by sounds and smells that she couldn't comprehend. In that moment, Amir's heart swelled with compassion. This child didn't deserve to be abandoned in this cold, bustling place. She deserved safety, warmth, and most of all, love. He could hear the frantic whispers of others nearby, no doubt noticing the lost child, but Amir knew that she needed more than just the attention of a stranger. She needed reassurance. She needed safety. He gently placed his hand on Zara's shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort. "I'm here now," he said softly, his voice a steady presence amidst the storm of emotions swirling in the young girl's mind. "I'm going to help you find your parents, okay?" Zara's tear-streaked face looked up at Amir, still uncertain, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to convince him that he had made the right choice. She wasn't just a child lost in the crowd anymore. She was a person, a life that mattered, and it was his responsibility now to make sure she found her way back to safety. Amir could feel the weight of her fear in his own chest. Despite his years of solitude, despite his own struggles with loneliness and abandonment, Amir was no stranger to feeling lost. But Zara's pain was different. Her fear, her vulnerability, stirred something deep inside him. It wasn't just a call for help. It was a call for compassion, for someone to step in when the world felt too big and too cold. "I'm going to get you back to your mommy and daddy," Amir promised, his voice firm yet kind. "Don't worry, little one. We'll get through this." Zara sniffled, nodding slightly as she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Her small frame trembled, but Amir could sense that the soothing sound of his voice had begun to calm her down, even if just a little. She wasn't alone anymore. That was the first step, and together, they would face whatever came next. He took a deep breath, glancing around him at the throng of people passing by, oblivious to the crisis unfolding right in front of them. The noise of the station seemed to press in on him, the endless movement of people surrounding them, but Amir remained focused. "All right, Zara," he said with a smile, though it was hard to mask the determination in his voice. "Let's go find your parents. Stay close to me, all right? I won't let you go." Zara nodded, clutching the sleeve of Amir's jacket as they stood together. Amir's cane tapped against the ground as he began to move, carefully navigating through the crowd. His senses were alert, attuned to every sound, every movement. But as they made their way through the station, Amir couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. He may have been blind, but his heart saw things clearly. Zara was safe with him, and he would not stop until she was back with her parents. With each step, Amir felt the weight of the world lighten just a little. He was no longer a lonely beggar, sitting in the corner of the station. He was a protector, a guide, and above all, he was someone who could make a difference in the life of a frightened child. And that was all that mattered now. Amir could feel the air around him vibrating with the energy of the crowded station. The noise was deafening, a symphony of footsteps, train whistles, and distant announcements blaring from the speakers. But Amir had learned to tune out the unnecessary clatter. His hearing, honed over years of relying on his senses, allowed him to focus on what mattered. And right now, what mattered was Zara's desperate search for her parents. As they moved through the station, Amir's senses were fully alert. He could hear the frantic cries of commuters, the occasional angry shouts of those jostled by the crowd, and the dull hum of conversations blending into one chaotic wave of noise. But through it all, one voice stood out above the rest, soft but unmistakable. It was the voice of a woman, calling desperately for her daughter. "Zara, Zara, where are you?" The voice was laced with fear, and Amir's heart skipped a beat. That was it. That was the sound they needed to follow. The woman's voice, filled with urgency and panic, cut through the chaos and landed like a beacon in Amir's mind. He glanced down at Zara, who was clinging to his arm, her face a mixture of fear and hope. "Did you hear that, Zara?" Amir asked, keeping his voice calm but focused. "Your mother is looking for you. We're close." Zara's eyes widened, her lips trembling. "Mommy," she whispered, "is it really her?" Amir nodded, smiling gently. "Yes, it's her. We just need to get through this crowd and find her." The journey ahead would not be easy. The station was packed with commuters rushing to and fro, oblivious to the plight of the lost child and her blind companion. As they moved through the crowd, Amir's cane tapped rhythmically on the floor, guiding their steps. He maneuvered Zara carefully, making sure she stayed close to him as they pushed through the throng of people. Every step felt like a challenge. The crowd seemed to press in on them from all sides, as if trying to swallow them whole. People brushed past, some too focused on their own lives to notice the blind man and his young companion. Others shot disapproving glances, judging the old beggar in his shabby clothes, not realizing the quiet bravery of his heart. Amir could feel the stares, but he ignored them. None of that mattered now. What mattered was getting Zara back to her mother. Every now and then, someone would bump into him, forcing him to shift his balance, but Amir didn't falter. He had learned to trust his instincts, and he knew Zara was relying on him. He could hear the sound of her breath, shaky but steady, as she kept pace beside him. His hand remained on her shoulder, guiding her through the sea of people. Despite the crowd, Amir's mind remained focused on the sound of the woman's voice. She was still calling for Zara, and with each call, Amir adjusted their path, moving toward the source of the voice. The journey felt slow, like wading through a thick fog, but Amir wasn't giving up. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. After a few moments, a soft voice interrupted their struggle. "Excuse me, sir," a man said, his tone gentle but inquisitive. Amir turned his head, sensing the change in direction as the man stepped closer. Amir smiled politely, nodding slightly. "Yes, I overheard you talking to the little girl," the man continued, his voice tinged with concern. "Is she lost? I think I heard a woman looking for Zara. Do you need help?" Amir's heart swelled with gratitude. In a world where so many turned a blind eye to those in need, here was someone offering help without hesitation. "Yes, thank you," Amir replied, his voice warm with appreciation. "We're looking for her mother. She's somewhere in the station, calling for her." The man glanced around, scanning the crowd, before pointing toward a narrow aisle that led to a quieter corner of the station. "I heard a woman calling near the ticket booths. You might want to head that way." Amir nodded, tapping his cane lightly on the ground, and gently led Zara in the direction the man had indicated. As they moved forward, they encountered a few more kind souls. One woman, seeing the situation, stepped forward with a knowing look. "Are you looking for Zara?" she asked, her voice soft. "I saw a woman near the restrooms, calling out for her. She sounded frantic." Amir felt a wave of relief wash over him. There were people out there who cared, people who were willing to help a lost child. "Thank you," he said gratefully, his voice full of sincerity. "We're almost there." With the new directions, Amir continued on their journey. Zara, her hope renewed by the kindness of strangers, stayed close by his side, her small hand gripping his sleeve. The sound of her mother's frantic voice was getting louder now, guiding them ever closer. But even as they moved forward, Amir couldn't help but notice the contrast between the kindness of the strangers they met and the cold indifference of the crowd. People hurried past, unaware of the tender moment unfolding in front of them. Amir, however, was keenly aware of everything. Every step, every shift in the air, every sound carried meaning. He was attuned to the vibrations of the world around him, and each act of kindness from strangers felt like a small victory in a world that often overlooked those in need. The crowd thickened as they neared the ticket booths, but Amir's determination never wavered. With Zara's hand firmly in his, he pushed forward, and finally he heard it. The voice that had been calling for her all along. "Zara, Zara." Amir smiled softly. "We've found her, little one." Zara's face lit up with a mixture of joy and relief. She pulled away from Amir for the first time, her tiny feet racing toward the sound of her mother's voice. "Mommy," she cried, her voice high-pitched with excitement. Amir's heart swelled with pride as he watched Zara run to her mother, who was kneeling down to embrace her with open arms. The reunion was a moment of pure love and joy, a moment that reminded Amir that even in the midst of chaos, there could still be light. Amir stood still for a moment, his heart racing in his chest as he processed the sounds around him. The clamor of the station, the voices, and the relentless movement of the crowd seemed to fade away. In the distance, he could hear it, the unmistakable cry of a mother desperate to be reunited with her child. "Zara, Zara." The voice was filled with so much emotion, so much love, that it cut through the noise of the station like a beacon. Amir could sense the change in the air. There was something different now, a sense of finality, of hope. He turned toward the voice, guiding Zara gently by the hand, his heart swelling with anticipation. Zara, who had been so quiet and composed throughout their journey, suddenly tensed. Her grip on Amir's hand tightened. "Mommy?" she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Is that her? Really?" Amir's voice was calm, reassuring. "Yes, Zara, that's your mother. She's waiting for you." Without another word, Zara let go of Amir's hand. In an instant, she darted forward, her tiny feet barely touching the ground as she ran toward the sound of her mother's voice. Amir's heart swelled with emotion as he watched her, a tear threatening to escape his eye. The little girl, so lost and alone moments ago, was now reunited with the one person who had been searching for her, her mother. As Zara approached, Amir could hear the soft, frantic sobs of the mother. He could feel the raw emotion in the air, the sense of relief that was palpable even in the midst of the chaos around them. "Zara, oh my God, Zara," the woman cried, her voice breaking with emotion. Zara's small arms flew around her mother's neck, and the two of them embraced, holding on to each other as if they would never let go. Amir could hear the sounds of their tears, the pure joy and relief that filled the space between them. It was a moment of pure love, of something sacred and powerful, and Amir couldn't help but feel a lump form in his throat. "Mommy, I was so scared," Zara sobbed, her voice muffled as she clung to her mother. "I thought I would never find you." Sanaa, Zara's mother, pulled her daughter even closer, her own sobs shaking her body. "I was so scared too, my baby," she whispered. "I couldn't find you. I couldn't breathe without you." The moment stretched on, both mother and daughter lost in their embrace, until finally, Amir felt a gentle touch on his arm. It was a soft, trembling hand, and when he turned his head, he could hear the woman's voice, shaking with emotion. I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. How did you find her? You're blind." Amir, who had been standing quietly off to the side, was caught off guard by the question. He smiled softly, his hand gently resting on his cane as he spoke. "It wasn't easy, but I've learned to trust my ears more than my eyes. And I knew that the sound of your voice, it would lead us to you." Sanaa blinked in astonishment. "But you didn't even know where she was. How could you?" "I listened," Amir said simply, his voice steady. The world can be overwhelming, but sometimes you just have to listen closely. You can hear the things that matter most. Tears welled in Sanaa's eyes again as she took a step toward Amir. You saved my daughter. I can't even begin to express how grateful I am. Amir shook his head gently, his face soft with humility. There's no need for thanks. The real reward is seeing you both reunited. Zara, still in her mother's arms, glanced up at Amir. Thank you, she said shyly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for helping me. Amir's heart swelled as he looked down at the little girl. You're welcome, Zara. Remember, no matter how lost you feel, there's always someone willing to help. Sanaa held Zara tighter, looking at Amir with admiration. You're a good man, she said softly. I don't know how you did it, but thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Amir smiled, his face warm with the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference. The world isn't always kind, but sometimes, when we listen closely enough, we can find the goodness that still exists. As the mother and daughter shared one last embrace, Amir took a step back, silently observing the scene before him. The reunion was more than just a simple act of finding a lost child. It was a reminder of the powerful bonds of love, the importance of compassion, and the unexpected ways in which help can come. Amir, the blind beggar who had once been ignored by many, had found a purpose in the chaos of the world. And in that moment, he knew he had done something that truly mattered. As the noise of the station swirled around him, Amir felt a deep sense of peace. In a world filled with confusion and uncertainty, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. And for that moment, at least, the world felt a little more hopeful. Amir had always felt invisible, a figure whose existence barely registered in the bustling world around him. Each day at the train station, he sat in his corner, a silent observer of life's chaos, feeling more like a ghost than a person. But everything changed that day. His act of kindness, simple yet profound, had led to the reunion of a mother and daughter, a moment that filled his heart with an overwhelming sense of purpose. As the joy of that reunion still lingered in the air, Sanaa, the mother, took a step closer to Amir. She looked at him, her eyes brimming with gratitude, but there was something else in her gaze, a spark of recognition, a realization that Amir was not just a blind beggar, but someone who had demonstrated a rare and beautiful kindness. You've done so much for me today, Sanaa began, her voice soft but full of emotion. I don't even know how to express my thanks, but I can't let this go without doing something for you in return. Amir looked at her, feeling a slight twinge of discomfort. He was used to being the one who offered help, not the one who received it. But as he felt the sincerity in Sanaa's words, he couldn't bring himself to refuse. You don't owe me anything, Amir said, his voice humble. I did what anyone should have done. I'm just happy I could help. Sanaa shook her head, her expression resolute. No, Amir, you have no idea what this has meant to me, to Zara. But I also see that you've been struggling. So much more than just today. The way you navigate the station, the way you make it through life despite the hardships. It's inspiring. Amir's heart tightened at her words. He had spent so many years feeling lost in the noise of the world, like a forgotten soul. To hear such praise from someone like Sanaa, who, he now knew, was a successful philanthropist, felt surreal. You don't need to live like this anymore, Sanaa continued. You deserve better. I've made arrangements. Starting today, you will have a place to stay, a small, cozy home. And I'll make sure you have regular support, both emotionally and financially. It's the least I can do for someone who has given so much of himself. Amir was stunned. His mind raced, trying to process the gravity of what Sanaa was offering him. A home, support. He had never imagined that such a life was even possible for him. But here was this woman, a stranger just hours ago, offering him a chance at a new beginning. I don't know what to say, Amir stammered, his voice thick with emotion. Why would you do this for me? I'm just an old man. blind and begging for scraps. "I don't have anything to offer in return." Sanaa smiled warmly, her eyes full of understanding. "It's not about what you can offer me. It's about what you've already given to the world. The kindness you've shown today. Amir, your selflessness has already made a difference. And now it's my turn to do something for you." Tears welled in Amir's eyes, blurring his vision, but he didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a beggar, not as a forgotten man, but as a human being worthy of dignity and care. "You've already changed my life today," Amir whispered. I never thought this could happen. Thank you." Sanaa placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and comforting. "It's the least I can do. But this is just the beginning, Amir. You deserve to live with the respect and care that everyone deserves. I want to help you rebuild your life, and I'll be here every step of the way." As Amir stood there, overwhelmed by the kindness he had never expected, he realized something profound. Kindness had a ripple effect. It wasn't just about helping others. It was about the transformation that could occur when one person chose to make a difference. His small act of compassion for Zara had led to the unimaginable, a complete change in his life's trajectory. From that day on, Amir found himself in a new chapter. The small home that Sanaa had arranged for him was humble, but filled with warmth and comfort. He no longer had to fight for survival on the streets or in the harsh environment of the train station. Instead, he could finally rest, knowing that his needs were met and that he had a place where he belonged. The support that Sanaa provided him went beyond just financial aid. She also ensured that Amir had access to health care, helping him manage the physical toll of his years on the streets. He received counseling, emotional support, and even assistance with learning to navigate life in his new home. Amir's story began to spread throughout the community. His life, once marked by hardship, became a testament to the power of kindness. It wasn't just his own fate that had changed. His act of compassion had ignited something larger, a reminder to everyone that even the most overlooked people could make a profound difference in the world. As he sat in his cozy new home, reflecting on his journey, Amir felt a deep sense of gratitude. It wasn't just the physical comforts that mattered, but the understanding that he was no longer invisible. The world had seen him, and in return, he had been given a second chance, one that would change not just his life, but the lives of others too. And so, Amir's life continued, not as the blind beggar in the corner of a crowded station, but as a man who had rediscovered his worth and purpose. He was no longer just surviving. He was living, and he knew that he would never again be forgotten. As Amir sat quietly in his new home, a sense of peace washed over him. The chaos of the train station, the loneliness of the streets, and the never-ending struggle to survive were now distant memories. He gazed out of his small window, where the sunlight streamed in, casting warm rays across the room. His heart was full, not with the weight of survival, but with gratitude and hope. Amir couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. Just a few days ago, he had been a blind beggar, invisible to most, living in a world that saw him as nothing more than a shadow in the corner of a crowded station. Now he had a home, a support system, and, most importantly, a renewed sense of self-worth. It all began with a simple act of kindness, helping a child reunite with her mother. The memory of that moment brought a smile to Amir's face. He had always believed that even the smallest acts of kindness could make a difference, but he had never imagined that his own act would lead to such a profound change in his life. The kindness he had shown to Zara had come full circle, transforming not just her life, but his own. Sanaa's generosity had given him more than just material comfort. It had restored his faith in humanity. It had shown him that even in a world that often overlooked those who were struggling, there were still people who saw the potential in others and were willing to help. Sanaa had reminded him that no matter how small or insignificant one might feel, everyone had the ability to make a difference. Amir's story was a testament to the power of kindness and the ripple effect it could have. It wasn't just about grand gestures or dramatic changes. Sometimes the simplest actions, a helping hand, a kind word, a moment of compassion, could lead to something extraordinary. Amir had spent so many years feeling forgotten, but that one act of helping a lost child had sparked a transformation that no one, not even he, could have anticipated. As he thought about the people he had met along the way, Zara, her mother, Sanaa, he realized that kindness was not just something that changed his own life. It was something that could change the world, one person at a time. Every individual had a unique story, a unique struggle, and the power to impact others in ways they might never even realize. In helping Zara, Amir had unknowingly opened the door to his own future. Amir had once believed that his life was over, that he would continue to live on the streets, forgotten and alone. But now, he saw that the potential for change existed in every person, in every act of compassion. He understood that life could always offer new beginnings, no matter how late they seemed. With a newfound sense of purpose, Amir began to think about how he could give back. He was no longer the man he had been, blind and alone in the crowded station. He was someone with a story to share, a story of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of kindness. As he settled into his new life, Amir knew that his journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. He now had the opportunity to help others, to share his story, and to continue spreading the message that no one was ever truly invisible. Everyone had something valuable to offer, and every small act of kindness could spark a chain of change that would ripple across the world. For Amir, the future was bright, and the lesson was clear. No matter where we start, or how insignificant we might feel, each of us has the power to change the world. And it all begins with one simple act of compassion. If Amir's story inspired you, remember that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change someone's life. Whether it's helping a stranger, offering a kind word, or simply showing compassion, your actions can create a ripple effect that spreads far beyond what you see. Take a moment today to make a difference. Reach out to someone in need, and you might just change their world and yours. Don't underestimate the power of kindness. It's the small gestures that often lead to the biggest transformations. Let's spread love, compassion, and hope, one act at a time. Share this story with someone who could use a reminder that kindness always comes back. Together, we can make the world a better place. Sparkling Heart.